Welcome in to the Friday edition of the 14. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Blake Lovell joins me. And Blake, we are getting close to the home stretch of the SEC season. The league has added some games to the schedule. Let's start there. You wrote a piece on that, and give me your thoughts on what the league did with those.
Yeah, I think kind of like we talked about, Chris, the theme was that we wanted to see the SEC kind of maybe prioritize some of those games with NCAA tournament teams. And again, I don't know exactly how they went about this because, as we said, it was going to be an impossible scenario no matter what because of the Texas A&M situation, and we knew everyone was not going to be able to make up all their games. So what they decided to do was essentially say everyone's going to play one extra game, or we're going to add on one game, and that's it. And so with that, I mean, I think LSU at Missouri, Florida at Tennessee, those are the two most noteworthy games for me, just because all four of those teams now are basically prevented a bad loss. So that's good for those four because we've talked about those four teams kind of at that next pack behind Alabama and Arkansas. And so I think the fact is they now are not put in a situation where they could lose a game that could drop them potentially into that bubble conversation. So I think that's good for all four of those. No matter if you win, it's going to help you get a quality win. If you lose, it's not going to hurt you that much on your resume. So I think that's good for those four teams. Beyond that, I pointed out that I think Arkansas technically could be the team that came out on the worst side of this because, like it or not, they draw Texas A&M, and we said that Arkansas and Vandy were the two teams that had to make up two games each against A&M. Arkansas gets the nod there, but that win does absolutely nothing for Arkansas. A loss completely just destroys part of their resume and maybe even knocks them down a seed line. Potentially. I don't think it would knock it down more than that based on their whole body of work, but I just don't think Arkansas has anything to gain in that game. And so I kind of put in the piece that if I'm Arkansas, I would not be too unhappy if that game winds up getting canceled. So that's something else that I would kind of point out. Everything else, Alabama at Georgia, it's just another game. I don't think it's going to be easy because of Alabama's road woes. I pointed out, I put it in the piece, Kentucky, still, they are not in an at-large spot anymore. I think Kentucky, with the math, has to win the SEC tournament to get in. They have to win out. Ole Miss didn't get any favors by getting Vanderbilt. Now they'll play Vanderbilt twice in a week because, again, those wins do nothing for Ole Miss, a team that's trying to, kind of build up its resume for the tournament. And then you have Auburn and Mississippi State, which pretty much is a game that just does not mean hardly anything. So,
well, let's move on to the next thing. You and I have been doing a lot of talking. One thing we are going to release is our 14, which is our rating the 14 best players in the league. And you and I have spent a lot of time the last couple of days. We kind of arrive at this differently. We had a conversation yesterday about it. I think we were miles apart on some players, may still be. But it was interesting, right? Because I think this is one of those years that sometimes the top 4, 5, 6, 7 players are pretty clear cut. This year, maybe not as much. You really have to dive into the numbers. You have to throw in some common sense. But what we thought we would do today was kind of make our selections for our 14, which again, our 14 best players in the SEC this season. This is considering all games. We looked at everything. We looked at shooting percentages, rate stats. I mean, we'll try not to bore you with the numbers, but I've got this sheet in front of me of about 50 players that we've evaluated for our 14 spots. And this will be a thing we do every week, but we decided this would be fun because I think you and I, frankly, are still undecided on some things. We thought it might be fun for the audience to hear us talk through this and maybe point out some accomplishments of some players in the league that maybe people don't know about. So this should be one of our more interesting podcasts, I think, so far.
Yeah, and I just want to point out something you said. We have put a lot of time into this. Like, you and I have spent a lot of time on the phone talking about, where would we place these players and trying to look at the different stats and just, the eye test, all of this other stuff. And so we know how this works. Like, there are going to be people that are upset that their, player of choice is not at the top or ranked higher and all that. But I promise you, we have looked at every possible angle we think we can look at when it comes to comparing these players. And also, this is also a subjective thing. Like, we are picking our best players based on what we have seen and what we have put together, what numbers we value more than others, and everyone's criteria is going to be different. So if you say, well, this player winds up winning SEC Player of the Year or that player, and you guys had him at 4th or 5th or whatever, again, it's very subjective. So I would like to point that out too, because I know with anything rankings related, people love to just completely point out how you're just absolutely wrong and all this other stuff, but everything's subjective. And so, it's going to be fun because, as you said, we have been a little ways off on some players, and I've changed around, my picks for the top spot several times at this point, probably. I've changed around, the guys in the middle a lot too. So it'll be fun to kind of figure out what exactly we're going to come up with here.
Yeah, and one favor, if you're going to argue with us, at least hear us out first.
And tell us why we're wrong. Like, don't just say that you're wrong and it's because my favorite player should be at the top. Like, explain to us why your favorite player should be at the top. I just want, like you said, I just want discussion. Like, I want to see things maybe that I don't see. So don't just say you're wrong. Like, explain why we're wrong and give us some data and some research behind it to say that, because I'm open to hearing anything. And so this is just our individual picks here, and of course we'll put it into a combined one. But this is just how we're looking at it. But everyone looks at things differently. So.
Well, in confidence level that we're going to get this all right, somewhere south of 5%.
Yes, there's no chance.
This is tough. This is really tough. Well, what I have done is I've broken down. I've got this sheet, and I believe there are 46 players on it. I think I took everybody who has averaged double figures, and this is for all games, and put them in the rankings to be considered. From there, we're going to eliminate a couple of players. Emmanuel Miller at Texas A&M, who was having a nice year, but let's face it, this is about conference games. Is a lot of what goes on here, and A&M just they played 8 games. That's just not a fair sample to compare him to the others. And the other one, and I know we're going to get blowback on this, is Sharif Cooper. But Cooper's only played 398 minutes all year. That number is not going to increase. And we look at it this way. We had this conversation, so we know we're going to catch heat for Sharif Cooper, okay? But if you put Sharif Cooper, like I think if you said Sharif Cooper's the 13th best player in the league or whatever, we're probably going to get some blowback because people are going to say, oh, there's no way he's not a better player than so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And you might be right about that. But on the other hand, some of these guys have played north of 800 minutes or are going to be there probably by the end of the weekend. And they put out a bigger sample size. And so it's really not fair to put Cooper on a list of guys who played 5 or 6 more full games. I mean, and by full game, I mean 40 minutes of playing time, right? And so you can't really put him on the list without losing either way. So the easiest thing to do would just kind of disqualify him from it based on playing time. And basically, we said you got to have at least 400 minutes to make the list, which is not a ton. But before we get to Sharif Cooper complaints, that's our explanation. We're not saying he's not one of the best 14 players in the league if we're going up and picking up teams like you do on the playground, because I think Cooper would be on that list, Blake. But it just was one of those things, like however we did it, it seemed like somebody was either going to get slighted, either the guys who had played the full season or Cooper, who was going to be lower rated than probably he would be just in a common sense things. That was our way to deal with it.
Yeah, and again, we're basing this on the entire season. We're not just basing this on conference play. Like, we're looking at the entire season as a whole, because I think, again, we're ranking this as our 14 best players in the league, meaning throughout the entire season, who have been the best players. And just to project out, like if Sharif Cooper had played the entire season, I would have a hard time leaving him outside of my top 3 probably. Like, I think he would be that high on the list because he has been that impactful in the games that he's played. So just for Auburn fans, like, trust me, the guy's really good. And, there's obviously a reason he's going to be playing in the NBA. But that was kind of the thinking was, how do we put him with a much smaller sample size up against a guy maybe that's played 10 more games or something like that? I just think that was going to be a situation where, rather than having to do it, we just say up front, we know the kid's good. We know he's one of the best players in the league, but we have to kind of draw the line somewhere if we're evaluating an entire season and evaluating all the other players throughout the entire season. They're just guys that have played a lot more games. And so I think that's something, again, we know he's really good. He's one of the best players in the league from my perspective. He would be in the top 3 most likely, like I said, if he had played the entire season, and may even have a shot at the top spot from my list. But right now, I think that's just the best way to do it. So,
yeah, also known as the host cop-out.
Yes. Well, look, we have to have some of those somewhere. Like, that's the thing is,
right.
like, in this scenario, when we're not just doing this, we're not just doing this off the cuff. Like, we have put so much time and put so many numbers into spreadsheets, and like, it's the only way to do it. And so I think it would have made it much harder to kind of, then you have people saying, well, how can you put him ahead of, I don't know, pick a player, like, and say, well, that player's played 38 minutes a game for, 28 games. How can you put him not knowing, that? So it's just, we're only going on what we've seen. We can't go on what we could have projected if a player had played a certain amount more or anything like that. We're only going on what we've actually seen throughout the course of the season since November, and that's why I think for him, like you said, we it's probably best just to kind of leave him out of the discussion for us, just because we're using sort of a different formula to try to figure this out. So,
and there will be some common sense applied. Okay, like for instance, Jeremiah Tillman from Missouri missed 2 games, and that hurt him a little bit in terms of minutes. And I lean on minutes a lot. I think if you play a lot of minutes, that says something. That says that maybe there are things that don't show up in the stats. I mean, maybe that says also that the rest of your team stunk and they didn't have a better option. But the more minutes you play, the more that probably hurts your efficiencies as you get tired. But that also, to me, says something about maybe a coach sees something like a guy's ability to set a pick or to pick up on a switch or any number of things that don't show up in his stats. So that's another thing that's important to me. And maybe I didn't value it as much at times as I should have, but how much you're on the floor matters. Defense matters. That's hard to quantify, but we do have Ken Palm's efficiency ratings for teams. And I think from there, we ask ourselves, okay, Tennessee and Alabama are good defensive teams. Who are the guys that are responsible for that? How do we give credit for that? So no stone was unturned as we did this. And the other thing is Blake and I started to put this list together and compare players against each other. It's really hard to compare, say, a point guard against a post because they do different things. And so what we're going to do, we're going to sort through this by positions. Everybody's categorized as either a point guard, a wing, which is a shooting guard or a small forward, and a post, which is a power forward or a center, as it used to be called. Again, not everything exact. But with that, Blake, let's start with the point guards. I think the guys that get consideration, you're looking at Scottie Pippen, Javonte Smart, Devontae Shuler, Jalen Tate, Javon Quinterly, Iverson Molinar. Maybe if you want to go a little lower down, Keon Johnson. Severe Wheeler, a guy that we discussed, but there were some flaws in his game we'll get to. Tyree Appleby, Xavier Pinson. Those are kind of the guys that we had. I think the top 3 to me boils down to probably in some order, Scottie Pippen Jr., Javonte Smart, and Devontae Shuler at Ole Miss. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, that those would be probably the 3 I would pick from that group. I think Jalen Tate would be a close right there near that group. And then I think everyone else, I would probably have a hard time including just in that category. Again, if we're narrowing this down by position, and I think if you're going to take a certain group from the point guard position, or guys who, they can play point guard, play shooting guard, whatever, but this is kind of that group because, we're going to have that discussion about Scottie Pippen. We know he's probably not going to, in the SEC's eyes, which is different in how they're calculating their award versus how we're ranking our top players. He's playing technically on the worst team. So I think for him, that becomes a difficult thing to do, to like, where do you rank him because of that? But I think if you're going based off an individual award too. And when you look at all his numbers, they're pretty good. So he has to be in there for me. Devontae Shuler, I think, also has to be in there. And then Javonte Smart, which is going to be a theme here that we talk about. I think it's so crazy, but we're going to have a hard time leaving out LSU's big four, I think, in some of these top spots, whether it's, maybe one of the guys misses it in our top 14 or whatever, but it is like, it's one of those things where LSU's individual players, those four guys in particular, are so statistically, like they play a lot of minutes, they put up a lot of numbers, and they've got some pretty good players. And yet, we talk about the inconsistency as a team, but like it's going to be hard to leave off this LSU group, I think, in this short list because all four of those players are so good, that they've really contributed a lot. And so I think that's going to be one of the fascinating ones for me. But with Jayden Tate, I mean, there's no doubt he's come right in. He's been a big part of what Arkansas has done. But, I don't know. Like, do I put him above those three in particular based on how we're going to calculate this thing, what we kind of look at in terms of, the top numbers and everything we value? He's right there, but I think I'm picking those other three ahead of him.
Yeah, I think it is. You've got tiers. I think the Pippen, Smart, Schuler tier is tier 1. Then I think Tate, Molinar, Javon Quinterly is tier 2. Then you've got everybody else. Let's get Severe Wheeler out of the way because he's a tough one, right? I mean, he's played a ton of minutes. He has logged 789, which I think is what? Second in the league. And again, that means a lot. The problem with Wheeler is shooting efficiency. The other thing about it, he leads the league in assist to turnover ratio. But this is where we start picking flaws, okay? Georgia, not a good defensive team at all. And I think the thing with shooting efficiencies is he is at the bottom of the list of all these players, or most of them. He's got an effective field goal percentage of 43.7, which anytime you start dropping below, say, 47, it really gets a little dicey for you. He shoots the ball okay from the line, 73%. And true shooting percentage is a stat that kind of sorts all those out, 48.4%. So he's really not shooting the ball that well compared to his peers. In fact, I think he's the worst shooting point guard on the 14 we've got here. Now, he doesn't take, I guess, he's taken 295 shots. So those are some wasted possessions. And what he does do is he leads the league in assists to turnover ratio. But between that and the fact that Georgia's just not a very good defensive team, he was one of those that I don't think belongs in that first tier or two, Blake, just because of that. But that's one that, as we get into discussion, people may say, well, why didn't he go there? And feel free to overrule me on this, but I just didn't see him when you started looking at the numbers and production and digging in, and maybe that's unfair, again, because he's played a ton of minutes. And when you lead the league in assist to turnover ratio, in terms of the players that we've got on this list, that's a big thing. But to me, I put him in that next, probably that third tier beyond those two for that reason.
Well, and if we're doing the rankings, like the fact is we have to compare flaws. Like, it's not just a matter of, okay, well, I think this guy's really good, but it's like, how do you separate them? Well, you've got to look at, what are the comparisons with their strengths? What are the comparisons with their flaws? And that's what we're saying. Like some of this we're going to have to nitpick some of this because that's the only way to put together an actual ranking. And I want to add to that because I think we may have said it a little bit earlier, but like for me, if I'm ranking players, I'm going off of who are the best all-around players. Like, I'm not going on what I think some awards sometimes move towards. And look, I don't think we're necessarily trying to replicate the SEC Player of the Year award. I think we are trying to pick our 14 best players, which is a difference at times, I think, based on criteria and what voters may value and all this other stuff, which I think sometimes certainly skews towards the offensive numbers more than anything. So for me, this is all about overall play. And that's where, like you said, you can look at percentages for someone like Wheeler and compare it to others and say, well, overall, he may be good at this one spot, but there are other areas that this other guy contributes in a lot more and maybe does it in a more effective manner. So no, I'm not against, like you said, I'm not against leaving him out of that group. Initially, I will say I had him on my top 14 list, but I think the more you dive into it, there are guys that can replace him. And like you said, I think it's, those four, I mean, specifically those three that we talked about, Pippen, Schuler, Smart, and then Jayden Tate. I mean, Iverson Molinar he's probably the next best of that group. And then I think Quinterly, Wheeler, like those guys are in that category. But I think that's kind of where I would kind of switch those around in that sort of order for me.
Yeah, and Wheeler is bottom 5 in true shooting percentage of all the 45 players or whatever on this list. And that's a big thing, because being able to put the ball in the basket efficiently, that's maybe the most important thing in basketball, or pretty close to it.
Yeah. So that makes sense to me. So
yeah, not that he's not a bad player. He does plenty of things well. But again, as we try to get the top 14, that's one thing that sort of sticks out and says that's a separator. My point guards, I went in this order. I went Pippen, Smart, Schuler, Tate, Molinar, Quinterly. I got Keon Johnson right behind that. I think there's a drop-off probably between Quinterly and Johnson, although Johnson does some things like he'll block some shots and things that you don't think about for a guard. Tyree Appleby, another one that maybe I underrated, but he's only played 498 minutes. And Quinterly, that's the big thing I had against him, too. He's only played 507 minutes. And so when you're considering wear and tear and what it does to your efficiencies, when you get that much rest, and you got a lot of the guys on the floor a lot more on this list ahead of you, that's kind of the thing that separates them. I would say the guys that I would consider for the 14 probably would be Pippen, Smart, Schuler, Tate, and Molinar. Again, though, I think a drop off between Schuler and Tate.
Yeah, honestly, I think I would only consider 4 from that group. I'd put Pippen, Schuler, Smart, and Tate. I don't know that I could put Iverson, Molinar ahead of some of those other guys, even with the scoring numbers. And look, his overall numbers aren't bad either, but I don't know. Like, it's just one of those things. Again, it's preference to certain things, and I think just those other 4 for me are ahead of the other group. So I think if we're narrowing it to 4, that's what I would go with a 4. If we added a 5th, I would put Molinar in there.
Yeah, Molinar does a lot of things well. He's got a true shooting percentage of 57. He averages 21.6 points per 40 or per 70 possessions. 4.9 rebounds, 3.5 assists, doesn't really block at his shots, a steal and a half, doesn't foul a lot, got a 1.1 assist to turnover ratio. Now, Mississippi State, 43rd in adjusted defensive efficiency. I think a lot of that, I don't know, their guards are quick and they get a lot done there. But some of that's on their bigs too. And again, this is where we try to figure out, where do you credit defense? Molinar also, if you look early in the season, they lost a couple games without him. So I'm going to put him on here as maybe a dark horse if we get to that last 13 or 14 where we have trouble. I don't think we should cross him off the list yet, but I think the point guard pool comes down to those 5. And Jalen Tate at Arkansas, too. Arkansas 16th in adjusted defensive efficiency. Tate's a guy that does a lot of things, defends really well, shoots efficiently, doesn't score a ton, but he gets rebounds, he gets assists, he gets steals, fouls a little more than you'd like, assist to turnover ratio, 1.5. He's done a lot of really good things, and I think he is probably on that list of underappreciated players we don't talk about enough.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, he's a really good player, and coming over this season and knowing they're going to have to plug him in like they have. I mean, it was going to be important for them in terms of having him kind of lead the way, knowing that you've got other guys around him like Moses Moody and these talented freshmen too. So he's played an important role there, and that's why I kept sort of moving him up on my list, because I think the more you look at his value to that team, I think the easier it is to kind of put him on that short list of guys.
Are we sold on Pippen, Smart, Schuler as the top 3 in that order?
I don't think, for me, I would have a hard time putting anyone else above those 3. So,
yeah, well, let's move on to, let's go wings, I guess. I think you and I are agreed Moses Moody's best wing in the league as we classify them.
Let's see. I'm just looking at our list because I'm trying to think of who all we've classified here.
Well, let me back out and give you and everybody the skin, because there's a lot of players to look at here.
Yeah,
I think the discussion comes down to, in some order, Moody, Drew Smith at Missouri, Trey Mann at Florida, John Petty at Alabama, Cam Thomas, LSU, Jaden Shackleford at Alabama, DJ Stewart at Mississippi State, Jayden Springer at Tennessee, maybe Alan Flanagan at Auburn, um, maybe Victor Bailey Jr. at Tennessee, who's really shot the ball well lately and has been that scorer they need. From there down, you're looking at Mintz, Note, Boston, AJ Lawson. Guys, I mean, Lawson, if his team was better, I think he's one that probably merits more consideration than maybe we gave him. But I mean, there's 10 or 12 players that all have pretty decent cases of discussion. I really think, though, we could probably narrow it down to about 8. I would go Moody, Smith, Mann, Petty, Thomas, Shackleford, Stewart, and Springer is the guys we probably talk about.
Yeah, let's see. I'm trying to think of who all you just said, but I think there's a clear conversation for Moses Moody, Cam Thomas, Drew Smith, Trey Mann, and then I think John Petty's in there too, and I think Shackleford. That's the thing, is like, what separates John Petty and Jaden Shackleford for Alabama? That's the things that I'm trying to say. That's where we're going to have the struggle, I think, to pick apart some of these guys, because what are the things that separate two guys that, for the most part, have some pretty similar numbers at times in some of these areas. So, but I think both those guys are, certainly important to Alabama's success, and they're the best team in the league. Man,
Alan Flanagan too. I think Flanagan. I don't think he's going to be into 14, but he's had a nice year. I mean, he shoots the ball well. He does a little bit of everything, and I think that gets underrated. I mean, he's a really good rebounding wing.
Yeah,
he scores some. He dishes out assists, although he also turns it over a lot. He gets some steals. I mean, he's a guy that contributes a little bit everywhere. So, I mean, that's when I don't think he makes the list of the 14. But I think he gets, that's one that I think we need to mention him, because he does more things than maybe people realize. Victor Bailey, too, another one. Bailey, I would like to see him shoot the ball a little bit better, but because of contributions elsewhere, he just doesn't give you a lot. And I think if you're going to be there, you need to be an elite shooter or moderately contribute on other things. I think, to me, the drop-off is probably after Flanagan. That's the last guy we discuss here.
Yeah, and I think the turnovers are an interesting note too, because, for him, I think someone that has had to do so much before Sharif Cooper stepped in. I don't know that I could even penalize Alan Flanagan for the turnovers, knowing that they just didn't have a lot of options elsewhere to be able to do some of the things that they wanted to do, probably on offense. So I do think he belongs in the conversation. You mentioned AJ Lawson. I think he has to be in there, because even as bad as they are, I still think he's pretty good in terms of what he does. And look, if I'm rating it based on the guys that I think are the best overall players, I'd probably have a hard time keeping him out of that conversation. But like we said, that takes our list to about 8 or 9 now, just from the wings, and we're trying to build a list of 14 overall. And so this is an area I think we're gonna have a hard time kind of narrowing down. It's just this group. So.
Well, I think the guys that we feel like ought to be in that final 14 are probably Moody, Drew Smith, Mann, Petty, and Cam Thomas for sure.
I think those are the ones that I would have a really hard time leaving out. And like you said, we could probably make a case for AJ Lawson, maybe Alan Flanagan. I think those 5 in particular, I don't think in any list I could probably leave out of my top 14 players in the league.
Okay, I think Cam Thomas is the guy that we are the most split on, and sort of have a hard time knowing what to do with him. Because you look at some things. Thomas, okay, here's points per 70 possessions, and this is across all games. Thomas, 27.0 a game. Scottie Pippen at Vandy, 25.7. Next guy in there is KD Johnson at Georgia, but he's not played enough minutes. And Cooper, same thing. Then JD Note, who is not efficient. Thomas and Pippen are both guys who score and shoot decent percentages. Now, this is where I have the issue, okay? Cam Thomas is a 47.2% effective field goal shooter. That's not a good percentage. In fact, I don't know where that would rank you as a team in KenPom, but I bet it's in the 200s. Having said that, guys like Cam Thomas also bear the brunt sometimes of, okay, shot clock's running down and we need a bucket, or when the ball's in your hands, so you got to take a low percentage shot. Or some nights those are kids who, maybe he's going to go 5 for 21, but the next night he makes up by getting 35 and really carrying your team. So he's one that's hard to know what to do with for two other reasons. He doesn't do a lot else. Like he doesn't really rebound a lot, which is not his job. He doesn't really pass the ball really well. Doesn't turn it over a ton either, but his assist to turnover number is 0.8, which isn't great for a wing. He doesn't really get steals or blocks. Really, all of his value is in scoring. And look, there's a lot some nights. But the thing with LSU that we've talked about, just a poor defensive team. So when you're evaluating everybody as a player, you've got to say, okay, who's credited for when the team is good on defense and whose fault is it when they're not good? Thomas plays on a bad defensive team, and he's a scorer who's not super efficient from the field. Now, he's outstanding from the foul line, and he shoots it at a high volume, and it makes up a lot. But he's hard to evaluate for that reason. In fact, I would say Cam Thomas is going to be first team All SEC, no doubt. I don't know for sure that I'd put him in my top 10. You're going to disagree with me there, but he's, in my opinion, he's the toughest guy to evaluate because of the nature of the team he plays on and the fact that how he gets his points without really contributing a lot else.
No, listen, I don't disagree with you in terms of the actual laying out of his resume for our rankings. Like I'm with you. Like it is what it is. He's a bulk offensive player. Like that's what he is. And there are certainly places for those guys who leads the league in points produced. Like he is above everyone else. I mean, he's above everyone else in scoring. And as I've told you before, like and we all know this. Like when you're doing this stuff, like you gravitate towards guys who just put up a lot of points because that's the name of the game, is to score more points than the other team. And guys who can do that, it can be very impressive. And he's on a team that's going to be in the NCAA tournament, and he's kind of leading the way as the most consistent offensive player, I guess you could say, just in terms of point output. Now, look, like you said, the percentages are not always consistent, but in terms of point output, like he's right up there. But he does get a lot of shots, and that's his job, is to shoot the ball a lot because that gives LSU the best chance to win. But, I'm kind of looking at it and saying there is a place for that. And I think he's someone that, if you look at it just from a national media, if you look at how pollsters vote and all this other stuff, like I think that he's probably going to, if he doesn't win the SEC Player of the Year, he'll finish second, in my opinion, behind the guy that I'm probably eventually going to make the case for. But I had him at number 1 for a while on my list. I've switched him. And he is so hard to figure out what to do with in terms of how we're approaching this of ranking our players and using the formulas and the systems that we're trying to do to make our best educated, ranking that we can on this. There's not like you pointed out what I was going to point out. There's not a whole lot elsewhere outside of the scoring. And if I'm basing it on best all-around players overall, I'm not basing it on guys who maybe have the chance to score the most points at the NBA level, because maybe that's him. But maybe, again, he's the guy that's scoring the most points at the college level. But beyond that, have we seen enough from his overall game to maybe warrant putting him ahead of some of these other guys that we're going to talk about? That's, I think, is the discussion we're going to have when we get down to comparing him to some of these other guys that we're going to compare him to. So he is the most fascinating case for me, again, outside of Sharif Cooper, what we talked about, which we've already made a decision on with him. But I think Cam Thomas is sort of that polarizing discussion that's going to be had. And I'm telling you, this is going to be a discussion that not just you and I are going to have. People are going to be talking about it once the SEC does their, season awards and everything, because I think there is a chance he's going to not just win Freshman of the Year, but I think there's a chance that he wins the Player of the Year. But I also think that there's a chance that people are going to look at some of the same things you pointed out and say, you know what, maybe there are better options just based on what a player contributes outside of just his scoring.
Well, I've seen how voting goes, and frankly, they don't, and they probably
Right.
won't unless something's changed. And,
Yeah.
and again, we're not here to, rubber stamp the voters. We're here to try to come up with what we think is the best. And I promise you that we're probably going to do. And I'm not trying to knock anybody in the media or the coaches. I mean, those guys don't have a lot of time. We
Right.
do. That's what we do. And again, LSU's also got a lot of other scores, Blake. I
Yeah.
mean, that takes a lot of pressure off a guy like that. Now, if he is, oh goodness, who was the guard for Ole Miss a few years ago? The high volume point guard, Moody.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you got a guy like that, or maybe Pippen at Vandy, where there's just not a lot of other options. And so you're getting the focus of a lot of double teams. Well, Cam Thomas can't get a shot. I mean, goodness, you got Days, Smart, Watford. You got a lot of other options on that team. So that's another interesting dynamic with him.
Yeah, it's just hard to judge because, if LSU, I don't know what the best way to put it is. If LSU was a better defensive team, then you would think that his rebounding numbers, maybe some of the defensive efficiency numbers, those kind of things, would help his case here, in my opinion. But the fact is, like as we've said, their defensive numbers are so bad at times to where you're looking around wondering, okay, well, where's the guy that's going to help those numbers, push forward and be able to kind of put the team on his back in that area? Because I've said, eye test matters to me too. Like I have to just watching guys play. It's not always just about the numbers. It's just, you're looking for something else. And I think for this LSU team, that's kind of the conundrum we're in with them. They've got 4 excellent individual players that can do a variety of things. But it's like putting it together as a unit has not worked to help them be in a spot. Yeah, they'll get in the tournament. They'll probably be an 8, 9 seed, something like that. But I think that's the battle we're having with these LSU guys. Is we know individually, talent-wise, they're probably among the most talented 20 players, 15 players maybe in the league. But we're also trying to judge this based on, okay, well, winning and value and all this other stuff. And yeah, there's just not a lot outside of what Cam Thomas does scoring wise. And so I think that is something that, when we come down to it, that may be the one thing that holds him back and maybe putting above a couple other players ahead of him potentially.
Well, here's the other dynamic with LSU, right? I mean, you have those 4 guys, and then it's a drop off a cliff.
Yeah.
Andre Hyatt is their next best scorer, and he's averaging under 5 a game.
Yeah, there's just not a whole lot.
4.2.
So they have to be bulk guys,
yeah.
right? So these guys have to, scoring wise, that's why they're putting up bulk numbers, is because they're not a team that's filled with just pure depth. They're leaning on 4 guys, and that is pretty much it from an offensive output standpoint. And maybe that plays a role in why they're not as good of a defensive team, is because they are putting pretty much all the pressure on 4 guys. And beyond that, there's not, if you're playing, you need to play with 5. And so maybe that's part of the problem for LSU. So it's an interesting discussion. And like I said, I can see it in both ways, but I think you brought up a point, is that I know why awards are kind of slanted towards offensive players, because it's easy just to look at the stats and say, well, that guy's averaging 2 more points a game than anybody in the league. He's putting up 22 a game. But if you, like you said, if you're like us and you get a chance to actually dive a bit deeper, the answer is not so simple. And that's where I think you look at it kind of with him. So,
well, and here's the other thing that complicates it, right? 2 things I really respect. Ken Pom, and I don't know how he does his all Ken Pom team. That's a mystery for the ages, but he's got him as the number 1 player in the league through whatever formula he uses.
Yeah.
So there's that. The other one, win shares over at College Basketball Reference. Again, that's one where I don't know what their formula is. I like the concept. He's, I think, number 2 or number 3. So both those systems, which are quantitative, like him. And like I said, with the eye test, he passes that for sure. So that's the other thing that complicates it too, is we dig into the stats and there's some flaws there, or some areas where he doesn't pad his numbers with other things like other guys do. But two of the best things to sort that out, still look at him and put him at or near the top of the league. So
he's the Missouri of our rankings, like the metrics versus the resume, and I think that's what we're gonna have to classify him as. We don't know where to put him because it's like it's a game, so I don't know.
okay, let's go back and get out of the weeds for a minute, and I apologize for dragging us there. I think the wings that probably go into final consideration to me, and this is the order I've got him in. I went Moses Moody, Drew Smith, Trey Mann, John Petty, Cam Thomas, and then the next group of Shackleford, Stewart, and Springer, and Flanagan. To me, Thomas is in the 14. I just don't know where he goes. But to me, those six, or I guess those five, I feel pretty confident are in our final 14.
Let's see. That would be Moody, Cam Thomas, Drew Smith, John Petty, Trey Mann. That would be my five. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's five. So we got those three. We got Pippen, Smart, and Devontae Shuler at Ole Miss in our point guard. So we got 8 guys right now. So let's deal with our bigs, okay? Top 4, I think for us, we're pretty even on. Maybe I think this is where the next tier is interesting too. But Herb Jones, Jeremiah Tillman, Darius Days, Dylan Dessou. I think 4 guys we'd have a really tough time leaving off, Blake.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and it's crazy to me to think, but like Herbert Jones has gotten to the point where I don't even think of him as a big anymore. Like I just think of him as like he literally can play any position. Like it's so crazy. We could put him in any of these categories, and I think he would qualify. So maybe that alludes and doesn't really takes away some of the suspense for what I'm going to argue here in a bit. But yeah, I think Herb Jones. Who else did you say? Trendon Watford, was he one that you had in there?
No, I did not have Watford in there, but
Tillman.
He's next. I had my top 4 in order as Jones, Tillman, Days, and Dessou.
Yeah, Jones. I think so, but there's another player outside of that group that you've pushed me towards, and the more I look at him, I think that I don't know. Right, Ramila White's an interesting one to me.
Well, if you have clarity on the next group, then you're doing better than I am.
I was going to say
because you've got a next group of Toulouse Smith. I think by the numbers, I think we've underrated him a little bit. At least you have, because we talked, and I don't think you had him in that final group. I think he's got a case though. Trendon Watford's another one. It's that LSU problem we discussed. E. Pons at Tennessee. Ramila White at Ole Miss has got the best true shooting percentage in the league. Not a ton of attempts, and so I think that makes it easier. You got Isaiah Jackson at Kentucky, who's the best shot blocker. You got Colin Castleton at Florida, who does a lot of things well, but has only played 407 minutes, and I think that matters. You got Olivier Sarr, another one. And by the way, John Fulkerson, I don't think even makes that discussion.
No.
He was the preseason player of the league by some, but just the numbers aren't there. But I mean, I think you've got 4 guys. I think we both would say Jones, Tillman, Days, Dessou are in that top 14. I don't think either of us really disagree on it. It's that next group that is really hard to know what to do with.
I think like Pons and Watford for me, I have a hard time like trying to figure out what to do with them because I mean Pons is like he's probably going to have it. Like he's not going to. I think Herbert Jones is going to win the SEC Defensive Player of the Year probably, but like Pons still brings a lot of value. Just hasn't necessarily brought a ton on the offensive side. So he's another one that the more I look at it, I feel like there's a spot somewhere for him in that 14. But like you said, it becomes a numbers game at that point. And do I put him ahead of some of these other guys? I think Darius Days is another example to me of one of those guys that is hard to place because he's the LSU guy and that maybe that's part of the battle is do we feel confident enough? And I think when you look at the numbers, Trendon Watford's played 145 more minutes than Darius Days because we know Days was out injured for how many games it was. But like that's the pick for me is like do you put Days ahead of Watford or do you put Watford ahead of Days? And I know for you it would be Days. But I guess that's part of the equation too for me is trying to figure out between those two guys particularly.
Okay, I'm going to give you a Watford Days comparison here. Effective field goal percentage, Days 67, Watford 50. Free throw percentage, Days 70, Watford 71. True shooting percentage, Days 68, Watford 55. Points per 70 possessions, Days 17.7, Watford 18.3. Rebounds per 70 possessions, Days 11, Watford 8.1. Watford gets a lot more assists, 3.6 to 0.7. So again, we're comparing different skill sets here. Block shots, both about the same. Watford blocks a few more, but neither of them are shot blockers. Steals right about the same. If you put those together in one category, they even out. No, Days fouls considerably more, which keeps him off the floor some too. Watford's got a 1.2 assist to turnover rate, Days 0.5. So again, we've lumped them in there as bigs, but they're totally different type of players. I'm still leaning Days, Blake. And I could be talked off it, but I think the shooting efficiency to me is a big thing.
No, that's what I wanted, because when I look at a spreadsheet and I see as many numbers as I see on ours, sometimes it just runs together, and that comparison makes sense to me. So I think, and we talked about Darius Days a lot as we've gone throughout, really specifically when he was out. Like, we saw how different of a team they were whenever he didn't play. And so, yeah, I'm fine with Darius Days. I think he's someone that maybe doesn't get enough credit for, like we said, maybe being part of that big group, because I do think the other three guys get more attention. But really, when you look at the numbers, yeah, he's been really good. So I'm fine with putting him ahead in that group.
Okay, by my count, we have decided on 12 over 14. It's Pippen, Schuler, Smart, Moody, Smith, Mann, Petty, Thomas, Jones, Tillman, Days, Dessou. So we got room for two more. I don't know if we want to start ranking those from the top, or we want to settle on our 14. But I'll let you go with what do you think is easiest next? Not that any of this is easy, but
oh boy. Yeah, like now it's like, how do we pick the extra two from the the group of 20 something? Oh boy. Well, yeah, that's gonna be a challenge, I think, in trying to find the rest of that group. I guess it would come down to who. All right, let me give you a short list of guys that I would put maybe in the other consideration. I think AJ Lawson's in there out of the wing group. I think Jayden Springer's in there. I would probably put. We left Iverson Molinar out, right?
We did.
I would put him on the short list of the extra two. And then I would put Pons on there. And then I think I would put. What about Robella White? Did we leave him out? We left him out too, didn't we?
Yeah, we haven't really talked about him much.
Let's put him in that group just to talk about him for a second.
Sure, and that's the thing where Ole Miss's bread is buttered on the defensive end, right?
Yeah.
Offensive numbers aren't going to be there for that group, but I look at it and I say they are quick on the perimeter, and we've already rewarded that with Schuler, who is not a great offensive player, but I watch the way they play and the effort they give and the minutes he plays, and I think he's in that top 12. And so the question, and this is where Tennessee and Ole Miss, and frankly, Kentucky, maybe. I don't think there's a Kentucky player in here, but you got Isaiah Jackson, who is the best shot blocker in the league per possession. Colin Castleton not far behind, but again, I don't think I'm going to put him in that final group because he's not on the floor enough. I think that matters.
Yeah. I think I put Watford ahead of Ramila White, which may seem strange from a number standpoint, but I still think that there's maybe I'm just trying to get all four LSU guys in this list, because as crazy as it sounds, I don't know. Like, for some reason, I lean towards these guys. And again, maybe it is just me overvaluing the fact that these four guys have to do as much as they have to do, and it's going to make their numbers, it's going to add to their numbers much more. So I don't know. I guess for me, it's adding Trent and Watford, Ramila White, guys like that. So
No, and I'm with you. Um, I had Watford over Pons and White and Jackson and Castleton, Olivier Sarr, another guy. I mean, there's a host of bigs that, like, if you say you get a team and you get to have any of those guys, I'm thrilled, right?
yeah,
This is a tough year where there's a lot of really good players, but there's not a lot of superstars. And it's making it tough on both ends, right? Because we are trying to wade through a list where I think, maybe players 15 to 30 are better than they are in the league a lot of years. I think 1 to 5 at the top, it's about as weak as I remember in terms of resumes. So this is a really interesting exercise to point out because I just think it's hard to get separation. I'm going to give you the guy that I think you are undervaluing, and it's Toulouse Smith at Mississippi State. I'm going to give you the numbers, okay? And I'm going to compare him to Watford. Minutes, Smith 735, Watford 677. Effective field goal 59 to 50. Free throw percentage, Watford leads that one 71 to 62. True shooting percentage, Smith 51 to 55. Scoring, Watford gets a point more. Smith brings down about 3.5 more boards. Watford gives you about 2 more assists a game. Smith blocks twice as many shots. Watford gets twice as many steals. In terms of fouls, Watford also better assist to turnover ratio. So I think you're right on that. But State's also a much better defensive team. And I think we've said this before, those bigs on the back line really set the tone for a lot of that. So I think that's one. If I had to pick a flaw with your list, I think that's one that probably we haven't talked about enough. But I think the fact that you have a reservation on him makes me hesitant to put him in my final list too.
I think for me, I'm probably, knowing this is an individual ranking, I'm probably overvaluing the fact that I look at Mississippi State and say, like as a team and what they're contributing individually, like who have they beaten? And like who, I think that's maybe part of the equation for me too. And again, right or wrong, it's just I'm looking at it and saying, okay, they produce these numbers, but I guess that's part of it too. But you know what? You can make I could say the same thing about Scottie Pippen and Dylan DeSue and say, well, these guys are producing great numbers, but Vanderbilt's 2-10 or whatever they are, 2-11 in the league. So yeah, I see it from a numbers standpoint. And look, you're not gonna Alabama fans will be happy trying to push Trent and Watford out of this group. I'm just joking. They love having fun with Trent and Watford on social media, but yeah, I get it. And like I said, I'm not gonna. There's a reason why he's in this group of short list guys we're talking about trying to put into the group versus guys that we cannot leave out of the group. So I think when we're getting to this point, it's just like, I think you just take your pick and probably know that you could make the case for the 3 or 4 or 5 guys behind that person in the 13, 14 range, whatever. Because I don't think there's a lot of separation with guys like that. So,
well, I think you've talked me into Watford, and here's why. He scores well. He's efficient enough. He passes the ball. He's got a 1.2 assist to turnover ratio, which for a guy that we're classifying as a big, that's really good. I mean, anytime you get above 1, that's kind of rare. In fact, I'm looking at the list, and a lot of these guys are, other than Herb Jones, they're almost all below 1. Like Olivier Sarr, 0.6, Castleton, 0.6. That's what you expect from a big, right? So he's got that dimension, and I know he's a different type of player. And again, we classify him here just to make it easy. But I think the point you're making is he does a lot of stuff pretty well, and I do think that matters. I mean, and he is a big. He's 6'9", but he does some things that you don't think of out of a guy that size, and I think you've talked me into that one.
Well, Smith does too, though. I think the more you look at his numbers now, I'm like, he does a lot. And I think you forget that sometimes when you watch, because Mississippi State, again, is, as we've said, they're the definition of the SEC this year in our minds. They're just so up and down that I feel like sometimes you don't really know what you're getting. But really with him, numbers-wise, he's not that up and down. So yeah, like he's another one that I probably have. I've probably undervalued him. And it's probably based on Mississippi State as a team versus him as an individual. So man, it's tough when you get to this group. So I think we leave Smith on there, and maybe he's got a shot to outdo some of those. But I don't know. I'm telling you, this is. I'm looking at our short list now, guys, like we just put together to put into those last couple spots, and I don't know what separates much with any of them. So
I'll tell you another tough one. Let's leave the bigs for a minute. Jayden Springer's tough because he hasn't played a ton of minutes compared to the rest of the list, 497. And to me, that matters, but he's efficient shooting the ball. He scores, he rebounds, he dishes out assists, he gets steals, he blocks a few shots. I think guys that are underrated are guys who do a little bit of everything, and he does a little bit of everything. And we don't have a Tennessee player in here. And I'm not sure that a Tennessee player belongs in the top 14, but what Tennessee is you go 1 through 7 or 8, and when you get to 6, 7, 8, they're better there than the other teams are, most of the teams in the league. And that's what makes Tennessee good. It's when you get further down that list. And so people say, well, how can you not have a Tennessee player in there? I think that it's a team effort. Man, if Springer had played more minutes, I think he's got to be in there. That's the question is, do you put him in there over a guy who's logged a couple hundred more minutes? I don't know.
Yeah, and I think, the most value he brings to that team is, I would say, is number one is the scoring. Number two is probably just distributing too, as a a guy that can play a couple different positions and handle the ball and that kind of stuff. I mean, he's had some games that haven't been very pretty on offense at times, but he's a freshman too, and I wonder if there haven't been a lot of those games, and so that he's a tough one for me because I think what was it initially I had him on my list. I want to say I may have had him at 14 on the individual list that I did, but I don't know. He's another one that I have a hard time placing just because I don't know exactly, comparing him to others around the league and putting him ahead of some of the guys we already have, I think it's a tough thing to do. So,
well, I'm going to give you a counterpoint, though, okay? We talked about Days and Tillman and what happened when those guys were gone. Springer doesn't play against Missouri and Florida. Tennessee loses those games by 9 and 26.
Yep.
He plays 5 minutes against Alabama. That's in Knoxville. They lose that one by 8. Again, I watched him the other night. I'm not going to say he single-handedly won them the Vanderbilt game, but when they needed baskets and needed somebody to make plays, he's the guy who did it.
Here's your stat. I've got it for you right here. Tennessee has lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games? They've lost 6 games this season. In the 6 games they've lost, Jayden Springer has either not played or scored 4 points or less in 5 of those 6, aside from the one they lost at LSU. Meaning, what, right? Like, if he doesn't score, they don't win. Like, I feel like that's what it comes down to. Because 4 points in the loss to Kentucky, 2 points in the loss to Ole Miss, didn't play Missouri, Florida, lost those, 3 points in the loss to Alabama. So maybe that's part of his resume too. So clearly, when he scores, he is the driving force for Tennessee, if you just look at it from that standpoint for me. So,
well, you know who else we haven't talked about at all is DJ Stewart at Mississippi State.
Yeah.
And again, a kid who is, I don't think I have him there. And one of the things that jumps out, he's got a true shooting percentage of 53, which is not good. He scores, he passes out a few, but he doesn't really rebound a lot. He does get some steals. And again, we talked about how they're pretty good defensively. I don't think I put him in there, but goodness, he's leading the league in minutes, I think.
Well,
he is. And I mean, so when you're on the floor that much, it says something about what your coach thinks about you. And it also, your efficiencies are going to suffer for that. I don't think he's in there, but I feel like he deserves a hearing before he gets thrown out.
I think Mississippi State is a blind spot. I'm just going to be honest. Like I think because of how they played as a team, I think just looking beyond the numbers has been hard for me to do with the Mississippi State players because I don't know like what it is. I just think you look at them and they're so hard to figure out that you know do you penalize those guys for that? And that's the thing is because they're the top three players, the three guys we've talked about with Stewart, Molinar, and Smith. And I guess what differentiates one above the others on that team is probably my thing with that group. And if it does, are they better than or are they what we would classify better players for our rankings sake than a Jayden Springer, I guess, is how I would look at it. So
well, the Bones people are going to pick, okay? They're going to say you got 2 Vandy players on there. They're the worst team in the league, probably.
Yes.
And they're going to say you got 4 LSU players on there, which I think you brought me around on Watford. So assuming you have, but again, it's supporting cast, right? If you're picking the top 100 players in the league, with Vandy, you're going, okay, you may have Dessou and Pippen in the top 10. You literally might not pick another kid on that team till the 100s, right?
Yeah.
LSU, same thing. You're going to go those 4 off the board. You may not get to whoever's next until we've gone through 100 picks. With Mississippi State, you might take guys like 15, 16, 17, with Stewart, Molinar, and Smith. So it's kind of the same thing with Tennessee, right? You might say Tennessee's got maybe 7 of the top 100 players in the league. In fact, I think it does. And so that's what this is. If you look at it on a team level, you may be saying you're sliding those teams. What we're saying is, no, they've got a better supporting cast, and that's where they make it up. And that's what makes this hard with these last few is you feel like you want to reward some teams. And State's 7 and 8, right?
Yeah.
That's not awful. But, and by the way, Georgia and Kentucky, we're not even discussing players for them. And really South Carolina either, unless we go back to Lawson.
And look, this is, again, subjective, personal preference. I'm probably putting Jayden Springer ahead of the Mississippi State trio for me personally. But if I had to pick one of the 3 from that group, that's a tough one. I would probably pick DJ Stewart, but that's, I don't know. Like the more I think about it, like the more I look at Stewart, I just think of, man, this guy's, I don't know, like that's a tough team to figure out. And so maybe that's what I've done is kind of cancel those 3 out because I just don't know how to pick between the 3 on Mississippi State. So,
okay, I'm going to give you one more because we haven't really talked about Jaden Shackleford.
Yes.
And again, that's the best defensive team in the league. He has played 704 minutes, which I think, does that lead Alabama? No, Petty leads Alabama. But he's playing a lot. His shooting efficiencies aren't great, but they're not awful. He gets some rebounds. He gets almost 5 per 70 possessions. We've talked about how good they are defensively. I think he's part of that. He's got 1.5 assists to turnover, so he doesn't turn the ball over, which is a big thing. He's a guy that I think, frankly, I think it's my last 2, I think, are Watford and Springer. But goodness, Shackleford's played 200 more minutes than Springer has and on a better team. And I don't know. I think that's a tough one, but I think he's a guy who deserves a mention and a look before we move on.
No, I don't disagree. I mean, like you said, I think, wins, what you contribute winning wise too has to mean something. And, that's what I said, like with him and Petty, I think, what are some of the things maybe that separate what, they do. But I think for Shackleford, like he's a driving force for what they do on offense. And I don't think there's any doubt about that. So I'm not against putting him ahead of Springer. And look, I am admitting it right now. Like, I feel like I'm going to be the one that keeps one of the Mississippi State guys off the list. And it's not because I have anything against him. I just think I don't know. Like, do I value guys what Shackleford and Springer do for winning teams over what those other guys do for a team that, like you said, is not awful at this point. Like, they're not. Like, Mississippi State's gotten a lot better, but I don't know. Like that to me is the push and pull, I think, with this group. But I'm not against putting Shackleford in there because I think he certainly, I mean, you look at just kind of what he's brought to the table for them, and I think, could you qualify having 3 Alabama players on the list? Absolutely, because they're the best team in the league. And so that's where I think you make that argument if you're going to make it for one of those. I think maybe you make that argument for Shackleford over Springer and maybe the Mississippi State trio.
So are we down to basically Watford, Springer, and Shackleford for the final 2, or
I think
is anybody
so.
else? Okay,
I'm
going to let you make the call.
Oh boy.
No, but I mean, you also, you probably have watched the league more than I have, and I've watched it a lot, right? But I'm gonna defer to you on that because, I'm gonna say you may have picked up on some things that I've not.
Look, we've got 3 LSU players on our list so far. I'm kind of leaning towards that and saying, I just don't like. Do we put all 4 of those guys in our top 14?
I think you pick the best guys and you don't worry about it. That's my philosophy.
Well,
people want to get mad at us, then fine. Then actually great. Come on and argue with us. But I don't think you owe anybody an apology.
Man, oh boy. Goodness, that's a tough one because.
Or AJ Lawson, by the way.
I know I think I put AJ Lawson in the other group because I just don't know if I probably am overvaluing just in terms of the winning aspect of it. But I mean, that's the name of the game. And so
are you listening to yourself?
I was going to say, it's like, winning is the name of the game. So it's, man, I don't know. Like I think I would, I think I would put Watford in that group. But I feel like I'll say this. I think I would put Watford in that group. I think I'm undervaluing Shackleford, and I think Springer is kind of in that middle for me. I think that the toughest choice I would have from that group would be, do I put Springer or Shackleford in there as the last pick? So that's I think where my mind is at on that because
Watford is your 13.
I think so. I think he is.
Come on, man, take a stand.
No, it's not easy. I mean, it's just like it's impossible. I feel like to figure out where to put these guys.
You like how I turned this on you
right?
And said you
yeah.
make the decision,
Here,
and now
you make the hard choices.
Yeah, right.
You know what? Watford's numbers, he's been a little inconsistent over the past month or so. I'm pulling it up now, and that's maybe a little more concerning than I thought it would be in terms of making this pick. Whereas I think if I look at, let's see, and look, we're doing this on the fly. I'm sure this is great podcasting. People just trying to listen to me think out loud. But I don't know. Like it's like Shackleford overall numbers outside of scoring. They're, man. What? All right, listen. If I told you had to pick between Jayden Shackleford and Jayden Springer, who would you pick of that duo?
Gosh, and I've seen both of them just carry a team.
I know, that's the thing is I think we undervalue what Shackleford does to carry Alabama, and I think we know what the value is of Springer to Tennessee. So I think that's where maybe we don't give Shackleford enough credit.
I'm going to pull up league numbers too, just league-only stats to see if we're missing anything here. Watford third in the league in rebounding in league-only games, 8th in scoring, 8th in field goal percentage. I'm looking to see Shackleford 16th in scoring. Gosh, there's no Tennessee player in the top 20 in scoring in league games. Is that something or what?
That's not surprising based on watching them play offense.
neither of them really showing up in league only stuff for the top 10. I don't know. I mean, I think.
Or are we spending too much time on the last three guys?
Well, 100% we are, but
it's hard because that's where we're narrowing.
That's water under the bridge,
yes,
right?
I was gonna say that's the hardest part, I think, rather than picking our top 5 or 10 or 14, or 12. Like it's figuring out, you've got to pick 3 players or 2 players out of 25. Like that's the harder part.
Okay, here's what I'm gonna do. Okay, Shackleford's been on the floor a lot more, and again, that Springer got hurt. It's not necessarily his fault, but that reflects to value. So I think you've got to look at that and you've got to say, okay, does the missed time make up for production? I look at them. Springer's a better shooter, a little bit better rebounder, but not enough. Better passer, but Shackleford turns the ball over a lot less. Springer fouls a lot more.
I think it's Shackleford.
Shots.
I'm looking now.
Yeah,
I think I would pick Shackleford.
I think it is too. I think that Springer per minute's been a better player. But I mean, he's been on the floor for 5+ 40-minute games. That the Springer hasn't. So I think that's your answer.
I think he's been rock solid. Shackleford has, outside of that last game against Arkansas, which he got in foul trouble and fouled out. So I think he's...
Well, and again, and we haven't talked about this enough too. Well, we have a little bit, but it's can you carry your team when you need to?
Yeah, right.
And I know he's not been their main guy, but again, he's shown that he can do that when it matters. So I think both of them have done that, but Alabama's having the better year and he's played a lot more.
I'm good with that. So there's our 14.
All right. Well, let's now we've got our 14.
now let's try to figure out how to place all of them. Boy.
Yeah, well, okay. We've got our groupings. I think we didn't really talk about it, but I think we both felt Moody's your best wing in the league.
Yeah.
And Jones is the best post. We didn't even debate that, but I think we both knew what each other thought. So to me, it's Pippen is the best point guard in the league, but he's not player of the year.
Right.
So if you're going to start from the top of the list, your player of the year is either Jones or Moody.
Is it easier to start from the bottom? Is it easier knowing that we know what our 13 and 14 is? Is it easier to say, I don't know. Like I'm curious.
For me, it's not.
Okay. So it's harder. Okay.
And by the way, we get to do this all over again every week. We won't do it on the podcast, but we're going to do our 14. I think here's another pet peeve. I'm not a big fan of teams being named until the season's been played.
Yeah.
Because what if you're borderline all SEC and then you're MVP of the Final Four? I mean, I think that matters a little bit. So.
And by the way, we're recording this with 3 league games left, so that can change things too. So.
But I mean, people are talking about who's player of the year, and that's why this is appropriate.
Yeah. All right. So I'm with you. I think my top 3 would probably be Herbert Jones, Moses Moody, Cam Thomas. And I know I'm up way above you on Cam Thomas, and I know I'm probably...
Well, I'm going to veto you on Thomas for player of the year.
No, that's what I'm saying. I'm not picking Cam Thomas as number 1. I'm picking Herbert Jones as number 1. I'm picking Moses Moody as 2, and Thomas would be 3.
Okay. Fair enough.
Unless there's someone, I guess the argument I'm willing to hear would be, like we said, and there's no science to this, and I think Cam Thomas, as you said, is the hardest one to place. So for me, I don't know if even putting him at 3rd is better, but I think, I don't know. I feel like I feel better about putting him ahead of the others behind him than I do putting him ahead of Herbert Jones and Moses Moody.
Pippen or Cam Thomas?
Yeah, that's a...
Now, I'll say this. Pippen may drop from here because we don't know if he's going to play again.
Yeah, that's the thing. Look, it's personal preference. I would probably still put Cam Thomas, but that's just me.
Okay. So, gosh.
You know the player I think that has a better case than probably anyone will give him credit for? And I'm not saying for the number one spot, but like I think Drew Smith.
Yeah, Drew Smith's had a really good year.
Like I could even debate putting him at 3. Like and look, there are gonna be a lot of people who think Cam Thomas way too low at 3. There are gonna be a lot of people who think Cam Thomas way too high at 3. But like I could debate putting Drew Smith at 3 because I think the value he brings as an overall player, I feel like is top 5 in the league overall. Now, again, you look at the team, and you know I don't think Missouri. I don't know. Like, I just don't know that Missouri is anywhere close to the team that they are with the resume that they have without him. And maybe, I don't know, like maybe there are certain things I'm overlooking. Maybe there are certain efficiency ratings that don't agree with that. But I also think there's an intangible part of this that is not on a stat sheet, and that's where I think a guy like Herbert Jones gets a bump. But I also think it's where a guy like Drew Smith gets a bump too. So,
yeah, I think Drew Smith is a guy that makes them go.
Yeah.
I like Smith over Thomas.
Okay. Like I'm not, again, like I said, Cam Thomas is going to be the one that's the hardest to place. We've already established that. So I think now that we know we've established that, anywhere we put him outside of the top spot, like I think you're going to be able to look and make justifications on some of this as to why this player should be here, this player should be there. So
yeah, I mean, we're splitting hairs.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, let me ask you, Drew Smith or Scottie Pippen?
See, that's the one where Pippen has the highest usage percentage of anyone in the league, right? And I think Cam Thomas is right behind him. I think they're the top 2. So that's where I think you look at it and say, okay, you know, and I think Xavier Pinson, actually from Missouri, who we didn't even discuss, is right behind them. But that's one of the things is I think Scottie Pippen, talent-wise, you could plug Scottie Pippen into any of these other teams, right? And you feel like he would be one of the best players on that team. Do you agree with that? Like, if you plugged him into, let's say you put Scottie Pippen on Arkansas and plugged him in for Jalen Tate, what do you think? Well, I guess aside from the age, what do you think the difference is? And is he as effective as a player?
Skeptical take, he better learn to defend better.
Okay, so see, that's what we're trying to figure out. So if that's part of the equation, then I think that adds to the conversation. So
Drew Smith does so much for Missouri.
Yeah, he does.
So I think it's Smith or Thomas 4. I'll let you make the call.
Boy. Are we talking about 4 or 3?
We're talking about 3. And then
Okay.
the loser gets 4, I think.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a tough one for me.
And I think we've gone ahead and put Moses Moody at 2. We didn't talk about him a lot, but I think you and I talked off podcast. We had a lot of agreement there.
Yeah. So we've decided we have Herbert Jones as the top player. And then Moses Moody is number 2. And gosh, man, the Cam Thomas Drew Smith debate. Why don't we come back to that? We know they're 3 and 4 in some order. Why don't we come back to that?
Next player left on the board. Gosh, I know Pippen's got his flaws, but to carry a team the way he does at times, I mean, I've seen him single-handedly keep Vanderbilt in games it should not have been in.
I'd have a hard time putting him lower than 5. So I think we're in agreement there. I'm with you on that.
Okay. We got Man.
Yeah, he's one that, like, he does a lot. And I think that's the thing with Florida is, like, Florida can be frustrating, but that dude does a lot. And,
So does Devontae Shuler.
Yeah, no, he does. All right, like you said, we're splitting hairs at this point. I think it's just. I think I would vote Trey Mann as the next one in that group.
Okay, so probably Mann, Shuler.
Yeah, that's what
Shuler's been on the floor a ton.
Yeah.
For a really good defensive team. Yeah. Okay. Javonte Smart's looking pretty good for 8 to me.
Yes. LSU players.
LSU fans are
everywhere.
going to love us, aren't
like,
they?
It's just, and that's the thing is, I think a lot of other people may not understand. Like, they're thinking, they're probably thinking, I've seen this LSU team against Alabama, and I watched this team get beat by 30 at home to Alabama, and then I just watched them go and give up 90 or whatever at Georgia. And you're probably thinking, what are these guys talking about for a team that's 14-7 overall? Not have the best record, but it's just they should be better. That's the way I think of it. Is like team wise they should be better, but individually they're elite, and I think that's the thing. Is I don't know. Like a college team, they have 4 guys that are elite talents, and so. I don't know. So I'm with you. I probably would put Javonte Smart in that next spot, to be honest with you.
Okay, I agree. I think next we're probably looking at either. Well, yeah, we're out of point guards at this point. So you're looking at Tillman's your next best big and Petty's your next best guard, I think.
I'd probably go Petty next and then Tillman.
Okay. We're splitting hairs now.
Right.
But
yes.
We got Days, Dessou, and Thomas at this point.
Cam Thomas
and then Watford.
Are we still got Cam Thomas down
no,
there?
I'm sorry. No, we don't have Cam Thomas.
Right.
We've already put him
so
on
it's
the list.
Dessou or Days?
Yeah.
Gosh, that's another one where it's like Dessou's on a bad team, but he's really good.
Honestly, I think I've got to go Days.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, too.
Dessou also is going to drop out of the rankings by the time we do this because he's done for the year. So
yeah, that's very true. So that's a good point. So I would go Days. Yep.
Okay. And then we've got Shackleford and Watford.
Yep. Whatever order to me is fine with those two. So I think
I'll let you put it up at the site. We'll write this thing up and you make your final decision. But we got our 14, and it only took us an hour and 22 minutes to do this.
Well, I'm putting your name on this too on the site, so don't think you're getting out of the backlash we're going to get from people for this.
Thank you so much.
Yes, don't worry. I'm going to put your name front and center on this too. But no, this was fun. I know a lot of people throughout this are probably thinking, as you're listening to it, you're probably saying, okay, I could give you 100 reasons why you should pick that player versus the player you're debating him against. And that's what we want, though. Like, we want people to send in that kind of feedback, like that sort of observations, because we're talking through this on the fly, and we're trying to figure this out as we go. And as you can see, like, it's not easy to do because we're using a different criteria than just a voting or a poll, something like that, like you're going to see with these normal regular season awards. So we're doing it the more difficult way. And so I think that has made for a much better discussion. And I think the depth that we have used to try to figure this out, I would hope at least there are some people out there who appreciate it. And then hopefully I'm sure that LSU fans, like you said, will appreciate us putting 4 of their players in the top 14. And I assume Alabama fans will probably appreciate us putting Herbert Jones as our top player in the SEC.
And if you have complaints, he's at the Blake Lovell on Twitter, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, send it right on over to me. And yes, I'm used to that at this point. So
anything else? I mean, if anybody's still listening at this point, thank you. But gosh, weekend thoughts. We got baseball and basketball ahead. I think I'm about exhausted just from this list, but anything worth a mention here?
I was going to say, the reason we made this podcast longer is because we know it's heading into the weekend. So you don't have to, you can listen to this weekend. You can listen to it in bits and pieces. It's fine. But be sure to check out everything we have over at southeastern14.com. A lot of great stuff. I know you guys put up a baseball preview with you and Barry. We have that over there. And then subscribe to the podcast. Any podcast app you use, find us there, the 14, Southeastern 14, whichever. And a lot of great stuff on the way.
The best part about this is the Jayden Springer is going to jump up for 30. Lawson's going to jump up for 35, and then Cam Thomas is going to go 2 for 20 from the field this weekend.
We're trying to motivate guys.
And then people will listen to this after that happens, right?
That's what we're Jackie Moon. We're not tacticians. We're motivators. We're trying to motivate guys to be able to have a great weekend of action. That's all we want. So Toulouse Smith, he's going to come out and go for 35 and 25, and we're looking forward to it.
Well, it is really a good group of players. I don't know that if you start trading, if we'd gone down to 25 or 30, I don't know that trading 25 for 16 at that point is a lopsided deal. I mean, there's a lot of really good players in this league that we didn't really talk to. And you look at the way the league is recruited, and of course there are, right?
In any other year, in however many years you can go back, do you think we would have ever had this conversation and not in an hour and a half, not spent more than 1 minute on a Kentucky player?
It's crazy. Well, the two things, the things that this league lacks are a stud player of the year. No offense to Herb Jones, but you've seen years where you've got an Anthony Davis or someone like that. It's just, they're an All-American guy. And I don't know that's going to be the case this year. The other thing is you don't have that stud shooter. You don't have the Shane Foster, the John Jenkins, the Chris Lofton, somebody like that. And that's what makes this unusual, too. I felt like when we got into shooting, it was like, okay, these guys are scorers, but they're not super efficient guys. And those are the two things that stand out. And the third, if you just add the depth from some, say, like I said, 15 on.
Yeah, no doubt. It's not easy to do, as you can tell from us talking through it. And it's just there's a lot of good players in this league, and we're trying to figure out the smallest detail between each of them. Not easy. I'm sure if we had the same conversation 6 other days in a week, we'd probably come up with a different order. We may even come up with a different list. So that's what I would say. This is just going off of where our minds are right now, and I'm sure it will change before we get to the end of the regular season and before the end of the NCAA tournament. So,
hey, the fun is about to begin. March is almost here.
Yep.
We're going to have tournament basketball. We're going to have baseball getting close to conference play. You got some good series this weekend. Clemson, South Carolina is always interesting. We've got Barry Allen that's written up a preview on the site. So, man, Blake, we'll do this again Monday, and by that time, we're going to have a ton of stuff to talk about.
Yep, we will indeed. So, check everything out we have going on at southeastern14.com, and, lots of fun stuff in the works.
Well, you talked about motivation. I'm motivated for lunch now. So with that, we will end the show. He's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. Thank you for listening to the 14. We'll see you again on Monday.